over the course of their working lives.
Thank you, David. It is now my pleasure to introduce an individual who is the heart and soul of AARP New Hampshire, a former lawyer who has led AARP New Hampshire since 2014, our state director, Todd Fahey.
Well, hello, Mark. Thank you. And greetings to all those listening. Hello, David. Thank you, Neil, for your kind introduction. We do love working with NHIOP. We share a lot of similar purposes, certainly civic engagement and the importance of politics in New Hampshire. It's worth saying again that we are a nonpartisan organization. We support no political party. We have no political action committee. And we endorse no candidates. I guess I want to repeat that. We support no political party. We have no political action committee. We endorse no candidates. We are, however, very focused on policies of importance to the 50 plus, and a huge one of importance to the 50 plus is Social Security. So as we go through this, Mark and I will go back and forth and ask some questions of David. We're fortunate to have him here, and I can take the first question for David. And then maybe Mark and I can alternate back and forth. So David, there are a few current developments worth mentioning, and the payroll tax holiday is getting a lot of play right now. The 2020 COLA and impacts on Medicare premiums. And so a lot in those three subjects, but you want to have our listeners hear from you because really you're in the front row seat.
Yeah, so I'm glad I got to start off with a little discussion about where and how Social Security is funded, because this has always been, I think, really the core of the program. Because obviously, if it's your money and you're paying in every time with your paycheck over the course of your work life, you're expecting to get that benefit, you've earned that benefit, and we want to obviously make sure that you get the benefit that you have earned. What's troubled us this year is this discussion about what some has been called a payroll tax holiday. And what they meant by that is a couple of things. For this year, what the administration has basically done is provided really on a voluntary basis for employers, essentially a payroll tax holiday, meaning that workers didn't have to pay their payroll taxes for the rest of this year. And it was intended as somewhat of an economic stimulus. Obviously, if you didn't pay, there might be a little bit more money in your paycheck. Now, obviously, we have a big problem with these payroll tax holidays. This was something that was also tried by the Obama administration during the last crisis that we had in 2008 to try to put more money in people's pockets. And really what we found out was, quite frankly, most people hardly noticed the additional amounts that were in there, 2 weekly paychecks. But even more important, if you're not working, which is really the biggest problem for the people who've lost their jobs, who are unable to work, they don't see any benefit from a payroll tax holiday because they're not working. And so the incentive was kind of misaligned. It wasn't going to the people who really needed it the most. So unfortunately, we do have a payroll tax holiday in effect right now. Most employers have basically said, look, we're not going to do a payroll tax holiday. We don't think it's a particular idea. It's too administratively complex. And oh, by the way, it's just a delay. It doesn't mean you're not paying into the system. It means come January, we're going to have to go back and collect the money that you didn't pay for the months that we had a payroll tax holiday. So how does that really work as an incentive anyway? Because if you had a little bit money back in your pocket, you're going to have to give it back in a couple of months from now anyway. Unfortunately, we do have this payroll tax holiday in effect now. We don't think many employers took it up, as I mentioned, but we do know that the administration basically ordered that the federal government needed to do this. So if you're a federal employee, you're currently in a federal payroll tax holiday. You may not have noticed a difference in your paycheck, but just let me assure you, if you are one of those workers, you're going to be required to pay that back beginning January of next year. So please set some money aside for that, just in case, because you'll have probably the first few months of the year to be able to pay that back by tax time of next year. So please be aware of that. But as I said, most employers have not done this. We wrote letters to Congress, to the president, to the Treasury Secretary, asking them, please don't do a payroll tax holiday. It's going to put people in a bad position. It's really not going to act as much of an incentive. People are going to be in a more uncomfortable position when they have to pay it back. And more fundamentally, you're beginning to get it undermining the funding for Social Security itself. We don't want to mess with Social Security's funding. We want to make sure that people are going to be able to get the benefits that they count on. If you mess with the payroll tax, which is the underlying funding, then you're going to be potentially messing with Social Security. Bad idea. People, particularly during this pandemic, when the economics were so bad, when people were losing money left and right, retirees at least were able to count on the fact that Social Security would be there for them. There was no problems with the stock market going up or down, having changed their Social Security benefits. Really crucial to the financial security of tens of millions of older Americans.
David.
Great. So, oh, sorry, Mark.
Sorry.
I think he's still going to talk about the COLA and our advocacy, and then we'll go on to the next question for him.
Yeah, and before we get to the COLA, I did want to say, so that was the payroll tax holiday for this year. But what also concerned us was that the president began talking about eliminating the payroll tax if he was reelected come next year. And we basically, wrote letters back to them saying, can you explain what you mean by that? Because if we know that the payroll tax funds Social Security and you plan on eliminating the payroll tax completely come next year, what is that going to mean for Social Security? How would we be able to pay Social Security benefits? We still have not gotten a clear answer for that, but that obviously is another issue on the table for the future.
So something near and dear to everyone's heart, and you know where I'm going, the 2020 COLA. Can you talk a little bit about that and our advocacy on it, David?
Right, so the COLA, as many of you probably heard, was just announced last week. The COLA is really based on the year-to-year change in what's called the Consumer Price Index, which is basically the prices for a market basket of goods for workers around the country. And because obviously we had a pretty rough economic year and went into a recession, those prices were pretty low. At the end of the day, the COLA for the year was announced as 1.3%. So relatively small, but in the last decade, we've had mostly COLAs that have been less than 3%. This was on the smaller side, although we've had a couple of years where there were no COLA at all. But a 1.3% COLA is basically averages out to about, for most people, around about a $20 a month COLA. We were glad to have it. It helps. Obviously, every little bit helps. I know people feel that their costs, particularly during this pandemic and a lot of changed lifestyles, a lot of their costs went up much more than that $20 a month. But that was obviously the official number that is established by the Bureau of Labor Statistics every year at 1.3%. And so at least come January, you'll know you'll have a $20 increase. But of course, there's a few other issues around that as well. And I'm happy to talk about sort of the interaction here between the Social Security COLA and the Medicare premium. Now, we don't have the full Medicare premium numbers that have been announced yet. That will be announced shortly. But as most people out there may know, that the Social Security premium is deducted from your Social Security payment. And so if the Social Security premium is projected to be particularly high, if the Medicare premium is higher than the COLA, well, that could completely wipe out your entire Social Security COLA. And unfortunately, earlier in the year, the projection was that the Medicare premium would be over $20. In fact, for some people, it could be as high as $50 a month. That would have completely wiped out your entire cost of living adjustment. The reason that the jump was so high was, again, back to COVID, because under COVID, there was a lot of emergency money provided to Medicare providers because of obviously the health situation we were having this year. And a lot of additional money was provided to the medical community, to hospitals and so forth early on. That money gets included in the calculation of the premium. So this obviously was concerning to us. This was a huge jump in the Medicare premium. And we lobbied the Congress to say, hey, this emergency money, this should not be included as part of the COLA calculation, the Medicare premium calculation. We need to transfer some general revenue funds over to take care of that emergency money. that emergency spending on hospitals shouldn't have to fall solely on the backs of seniors in terms of the Medicare premium. And if there's a little bit of good news for this year, it's the fact that in the last basically budget deal, they agreed, yes, that's right. Not only are we going to not count that money, and that took care of about half of the entire premium increase was that emergency money. But not only that, we're going to spread out some of the additional premium increases over the next 3 years. And therefore, that's going to bring the premium down to a much lower level. We don't have the exact projection yet. That'll be announced probably sometime in the next perhaps month or so. But we think the premium increase is only going to be for this year somewhere in the range of about $5. So that's good news. We have a $20 Social Security COLA. We have a $5 Medicare premium. So the premium is going to be a little bit lower. We're still going to have a COLA. So pretty good for most people. And at least we were pleased we were able to do some advocacy there to make sure people can get their COLA and keep their Medicare premium low.
That's some good news. Marc, take it away with the threats.
David, I'm sorry to have interrupted you. David, you've been the AARP's top expert on Social Security and its lead lobbyist on this critical issue with decades of experience on Capitol Hill, advocating for Social Security. I think the question everyone watching or listening to this wants to know, what is the biggest threat to Social Security?
That's a great question. Of course, the biggest threat in the long term is that we don't do anything to deal with the fact that we do have a long-term challenge with Social Security. And that's primarily due to the fact that not only are more people living longer, as we all know, but we're not having as many children. There are not as many workers going into the system. And it's important to have, obviously, workers going into the system and paying those payroll taxes that help fund the benefits. So over the long term, that's the biggest threat. But in some ways, I don't even like to use the word threat so much because people hear about Social Security, and right now we know we have enough money to pay benefits for about the next 15 years through about 2035. But after that, it's not like there's no money left. Some people hear, oh, in 2035, Social Security runs out of money. Well, Social Security never runs out of money. It just runs short of money. And right now, if we did nothing, even after 2035, when the trust fund money would all be spent out, there's still all this money coming into Social Security. And so even at that point in time, we can still pay nearly 80% of all the benefits that are owed. And it's not just for a short period of time. It goes throughout the rest of the century. We have enough money coming in to pay at least 3/4 worth of benefits. So that's partial good news because getting 3/4 is obviously better than nothing. But of course, losing 25% of your benefit is not a good deal either. And so the biggest threat is that we need to take action between now and that time period to make sure that we can prevent that 25% cut in benefits from happening, even though it's 15 years from now. Now, some people may say, well, we're okay now. We may as well, wait a while. And to some extent, that's true because we obviously have other immediate problems right now. We have the COVID problem to deal with. We have the economic situation now that we have to deal with. And dealing with the Social Security problem 10 or 15 years off may not be as immediate as those other challenges. But we simply can't wait forever to take care of that because the longer we wait, the harder it gets to fix. The options become a little bit more difficult. And so we do want to get into a conversation about how to make sure we can prevent that 25% cut sometime before we get to 2035. And the sooner we get to that debate, the better. So to me, that's the one sort of big long-term threat. The big short-term threat is that because of the pandemic and the economic situation we've had, there's been a dramatic increase in the budget deficit. And we've really run up another couple of $1 trillion of debt in trying to help basically get ourselves out of this recession we're in. And so the short-term problem we have is what we've seen in the past is that once we start running up the debt, there's a lot of people go running around Washington saying, oh, we've run up this big debt because of the pandemic. We need to cut Social Security to help deal with that deficit problem. And this is something that AARP has been strongly opposed to for as long as I've been at AARP and before. We don't think Social Security should be a piggy bank for dealing with problems with the rest of the things going on in the federal budget. Social Security is a separate program. It's separately funded by its payroll taxes. And we don't want to rob the Social Security piggy bank to help deal with the problems in the rest of the federal budget. But I think you may hear calls for that come next year. And that's the sort of short-term threat that we're concerned about. People looking to cut Social Security to deal with a budget deficit it didn't really cause.
David, what do you think we need to do to have long-term solvency?
Well, it's interesting because we haven't really had a real discussion about long-term solvency in really quite some time. The last big package we had was back in 1983. And at that point in time, we had only 6 months left before we were going to run short of money. And we had a big debate with all the different potential options on the table. And everybody came together to say, okay, here's what we need to do to fix the system. We haven't really had that discussion or debate now for several decades. You know, we had a little debate about 15 years ago when the Bush administration wanted to turn Social Security into private accounts. And people rose up and said, no, that's a terrible idea. We don't want to put our Social Security at risk. We don't want to get our Social Security guaranteed money tied up in the stock market. You know, we have other savings programs for that. And that idea was soundly defeated. But we never really got into a discussion about, okay, what improvements do we make to actually close that gap that we have in Social Security? And so until we have that debate and we talk about the different options that people have, we can't really make too much movement in Congress on that because we're going to need, you know, people across the spectrum, people across the country, sort of all having that discussion and debate. Because let's face it, Social Security affects every worker and every retiree in the country. And so there has to be an understanding of the options, a national discussion of it, and really some broad buy-in before we can move forward. And we haven't had that debate at all yet. And so really that's step one in trying to figure out how we close the long-term gap for Social Security.
Thank you. Todd, do you have a follow-up question or do you want to go to another question?
No, I don't think so. I see a lot of folks are entering things in the chat box, and I would encourage you to continue doing that. We'll collect those and try to get to as many of those questions as we can toward the end of our hour together. But we can maybe talk about, you want to go to the question about our resources that we have and ask David that, and then perhaps our intrepid tech expert at St. Anselm College behind the scenes, Mason, thank you for your great work, can put up can put up a little bit of the link that we have, and we'll also put it in the chat box so you can see where you can get information. So go ahead and ask him the question about, you know, the information we make available to voters and our members.
Yeah, David, does AARP have resources on Social Security for voters? Any examples?
Yeah, certainly for this immediate election, we have some one-pagers on a number of the key issues that we care about. And if they can put the sites up in the chat box, that would be great. But you can go to www.aarp.org/politics and election info, and you can find out some of the one pages we have on some key issues, Social Security being one of them. I hope they can put that link up for people to use. We were also very pleased to have basically an interview with our news bulletin with both Vice President Biden and President Trump on a number of key issues. Now, I know if anyone who watched that first debate knew that we didn't really get into a whole lot of issues, and we certainly didn't get into some of the issues that seniors really care about, particularly around Social Security and Medicare and prescription drugs. But we were able to ask these questions of the two candidates. And we think it was a good place to go if you want to get a sense of where some of the presidential candidates stand on some of these key issues of Social Security and Medicare. So for this purposes of this upcoming election, I would really recommend that you check out some of our resources on Social Security, but also to check out the conversation with the two candidates. I think it's very important that people have a sense of where the candidates stand so you can feed that information into your choices of whom to vote for this November.
David, thank you. Todd, follow up?
I don't think so. Maybe we can just, is it possible to flash those two links on the screen, Mason? And if it is, put them on up. And if not, we can give people the resources a little later in the chat box so they can go. But to re-echo what David just said, AARP.org, or you can type in AARP.org and Biden and Trump, and it will come up, and Social Security. You will see, we'll give you the links a little later. But if we can pull it up, let's. If we can't, we'll just move on through the agenda. Great. So I guess it's up to me now to take it away to talk about New Hampshire, huh, Mark?
Yes, thank you, Todd.
Well, thank you. Okay, so we've talked a lot about Social Security in New Hampshire. This has been something we've been talking about as an organization for years. And certainly Social Security just celebrated its 85th anniversary. So before I come into New Hampshire, I want to talk a little bit about the landscape nationally and Social Security. The vast majority of Americans, 93% of Republicans and 99% of Democrats and 92% of independents, see Social Security as an important government program. And 56% believe it is even more important for retirees in light of the coronavirus pandemic. Starting with that premise, it's slightly concerning to us as an advocacy organization that there is very little attention paid to what the candidates think about this critical program that impacts so many different people here in the Granite State. A few pieces of information that are important. We fielded a survey back between July and August of 1,441 Americans, right? So I guess it's not just a New Hampshire centric survey, but it was a national survey. And so we have a pretty good confidence level in the results. 3/4 of Americans are worried, based upon that survey, that Social Security will not provide enough to live on during their retirement. 2/3 of Americans believe the average benefit of roughly $1,500 a month is too low. And nearly 3 in 5 Americans are not confident in the future of Social Security for reasons David discussed. And the confidence in the program is lowest amongst the 30 to 49-year-olds, who only 28% think it's going to be around. And again, to echo what David had said, the program doesn't go away in 2035. There will be benefits, but they will be reduced benefits of a magnitude of between 20 and 25%. I guess it fluctuates. It's always a math problem. It's always dependent upon expenses and revenues, inflows and outflows. But it's a really important piece. So the reason it's important is because so many rely upon it, and it is a wildly popular program across the political spectrum, nationally and here in the Granite State. So why this program today? We wanted to make sure that regardless of what was happening with the mainstream news media or any other outlet, or the situation presently, and we have lots of headwinds right now, we all know it, the pandemic, the economic challenges, we have many of our societal and social issues and equity issues and things that we're all seeing nationally that are really vying for the attention of those people running for office and those people covering those races. It is my sincere hope, and I'm sure a lot of you, that those things will indeed at some point pass, or at least they'll soften a bit. If we can all work together to resolve those issues, as good Americans tend to do, and we have done in our history. But here's what I would say. Regardless, the need for Social Security, the need for Medicare, and the need for similar programs are going to exist and continue long after this election. So with that in mind, it's a little concerning that there are 312,000 people in New Hampshire who rely upon this program. 220,000 of these folks are retired. To give you some additional numbers, the benefit is about $1,500 a month in New Hampshire as it is nationally. A little less for women based upon historical wage gaps and them being out of the workforce for caregiving, particularly bearing in mind that those people collecting Social Security tend to be a little bit older at this point. 21% rely upon Social Security for 90% or more of their family's income. And 48% in New Hampshire rely upon Social Security for 50% or more of family income. So on the micro level, individuals, it's a big deal. Your benefits get cut by 25%, given that type of reliance on a program that has really pulled more people from poverty than any other in the nation's history. That is a big problem for your parents, for your grandparents, for your neighbors, for anybody you might know, other Granite Staters. It's a critically important program, and we need to be thinking of it about how it impacts an individual on the micro level. On the macro level, and I'll just get into economics for a second before we get to the main course, hearing from the candidates, which I promise you we shall do momentarily. But there's a principle that says if one takes $1 and spends it in the economy, it's not just $1 in and $1 out. There's a multiplier effect. So there's $1 of economic activity that goes into the economy, but there's a multiplier effect, meaning that has an amplified effect. So it'll come out as like $1.20. So again, but the reverse is also true, right? If you have less money coming in because there's a benefit cut years from now, then there's less money in, but there's also, there's an amplified effect of what the impact is on a global level in New Hampshire. Adding it all up, we are disappointed that this isn't being highlighted in the news. We are not insensitive to the issues of our time. And we fully understand the challenges we're facing, and we're all Americans like you. But it is our job to speak loudly and strongly and competently and in a nonpartisan way for these programs that are the bedrock of financial security for New Hampshire. So the purpose of today is to have a chance to have you hear from us on the issue, have you hear from our expert, David Certner, have you be aware of some resources available to you on our website, which I'd encourage you again to go look at. But perhaps most importantly, we're going to have the candidates, we're going to roll video that we've gotten from the candidates as part of our Protect Voters 50+ campaign to let you hear from each of them what is their position on Social Security. You'll see the question, you'll see the answers. We did not edit their answers. We asked the candidates to film their responses, and we simply we made the presentation of their answers uniform. But with no further ado, we will hear from the candidates for the 1st Congressional District. We will hear from the candidates for the U.S. Senate and the candidates for the 2nd Congressional District. And you can hear what they are going to do on Social Security. After that, we'll get to the chat box and take some questions. So if we could run those videos, that would be great. Thank you.
So, my dad's actually on Social Security right now, so I want to make sure that that's protected for him and all current retirees. We also need to make sure that for those who are paying into it now, that's there for them when they do retire, because so many people are relying on that, and it's part of their retirement planning right now. There's other ways to reduce the deficit. We need to grow the economy. We also need to cut discretionary spending. And we also have to make sure that we're improving our procurement process. There are billions of dollars of waste in procurement every year. If we tackle those problems, we can reduce our deficit while also making sure that Social Security is there for those who are relying on and those who are paying into it.
Social Security is a foundational program that provides a critical safety net and a secure retirement for our nation's seniors. Recently, it was announced that a proposed elimination of the payroll tax that funds Social Security would mean benefit checks could stop in 3 years. I will fight this dangerous proposal with everything I've got, just like I've been working to oppose privatization, means testing of benefits, and other proposals that would weaken Social Security. Members of both parties must come together to protect benefits that older Americans have earned through a lifetime of hard work. Ensuring a dedicated funding source that extends the solvency of Social Security will help prevent the program from becoming part of a future conversation on how to rein in spending. When the economy is growing again, we must reduce the deficit. However, I will never do that at the expense of Social Security or the benefits that Americans have earned.
Hi, I'm Corky Messner. As the U.S. Senator from New Hampshire, I will ensure that Social Security is never cut as part of deficit reduction by never voting for it. I will never vote to reduce Social Security benefits for anybody. And my position is informed by the fact that I came from a blue-collar family, and my mother, God bless her soul, in her old age, only had Social Security. There was no retirement after my father died. She relied solely on Social Security. So I understand the importance of Social Security benefits to seniors, so I will never vote for reduction. And in fact, I will fight hard to make sure Social Security benefits are never reduced. And I will fight, I will be your champion in the U.S. Senate. Thank you.
Seniors who work hard all their lives deserve a secure retirement. They should be able to depend on Social Security when they need it. They paid into it, it should be there in retirement. About a third of New Hampshire seniors would be in poverty without Social Security. Now, Social Security faces some long-term challenges, but it is not in crisis, and we should not be using Social Security to address this country's deficits. I will fight against that under any circumstances. There are other ways to address our debt and deficits in this country. We need to end tax breaks for the biggest corporations, for the big pharmaceutical companies, for those who can afford to pay taxes and should be doing that. I have worked across the aisle to try and protect Social Security, and I will continue to do that as your senator.
I absolutely support Social Security. There are people out there and our senior citizens that absolutely depend on Social Security, and we need to make sure that that's protected. The truth of the matter is that we have to have an honest dialogue about Social Security. We have to make sure that Social Security is there today for those that are using it, but it has to be there for the future generations to come. Washington could do some things now. They're not doing it. We have to start taking the hard look at it now so that it's there for the current people using it and for future generations for the folks of the great state of New Hampshire going forward.
In Congress, I've consistently opposed partisan proposals that would cut benefits for current and future retirees. America's seniors rely on this program, and it is critical that Social Security remains solvent for generations to come. So that's why I helped introduce the Social Security 2100 Act, which would ensure the program's solvency through the end of this century while expanding benefits and cutting taxes for beneficiaries. I'm proud to help champion this legislation because I will always stand up for Granite State seniors.
So we've had a little bit of technical difficulty on a few of those videos, but as I said, we're doing our best, as we all are, to navigate virtually during the midst of a pandemic. And but I hope you all enjoyed those questions and the answers from our candidates, because we were very happy to bring them to you in a very focused way, a very simple question and their answers. So again, nonpartisan organization as we are, we're not telling people how to vote or what they should be concerned about. We're simply giving you information about what people are concerned about, Social Security being top of mind for many folks, and also giving you resources to decide how best to cast your vote. So with that, I think maybe we'll go back to the chat box and have a few questions for David while we have him here, because we do believe that information is critically important, that people need to understand what's true and what is not true about something like the Social Security program. I mean, clearly every year the Social Security trustees come out with a 220 plus page report about the goods and bads of Social Security. For those of you who are so inclined, I being one, you can read it at night or just to read the executive summary and read it for yourself, so you'll understand where things are. And that's not a bad place to start, right? It's a primary source is what we call that in the business. But let's go to the chat box and have a few questions. Linda has a question, David, and this is a question that you will have heard before, and here it is. Does the $2 trillion include monies that were diverted out of the Social Security account? There is that continual suggestion of prior diversion, which has put the situation to be a little more dire now, obviously. And how much was diverted? Is that amount that has been diverted accruing interest that is due back to the Social Security account? So I guess in a nutshell, Linda's wondering whether there was money taken out and whether it was deemed to be a loan, and then there's an IOU out there somewhere that's somebody's going to put that back in. Can you speak to that?
Sure, and obviously this is an issue we hear about all the time, and the confusion over the Social Security Trust Fund and what's happened to the money, if anything, there. So let me kind of walk through the steps. Any additional money that goes into Social Security that's not used for benefits goes in to the Social Security Trust Fund. That money cannot be used for anything else but Social Security. But the money, of course, doesn't just sit there. By law, all that money is invested in basically treasury bonds. And those treasury bonds, like any that you may own or pension funds may own or insurance companies may own, they all pay interest. And I think there's roughly around 4% a year going in on all those treasury bonds right now, back into the Social Security Trust Fund. So the money is not just sitting there, but what is sitting there is basically a stack, so to speak, of treasury bonds that are held by the Social Security Trust Funds. And that money needs to be paid back. And so whenever you hear talk about stealing money, that money has not been stolen. We do fully expect that the U.S. government will make good on all of its treasury bonds, including to Social Security, as it has done for every bond in its history. The treasury securities are considered the safest investment in the world. They've never defaulted. There are certainly, Social Security is one of the largest bond holders out there, but we fully expect that those bond holders with interest will continue to be paid back.
Multi-part question from Ken, David. I'll try to break it down. So first one, doesn't Congress have to approve eliminating the payroll tax holiday permanently? Should it continue into next year?
Well, the president, through his executive orders this year, was basically able to do a temporary payroll tax holiday. Generally speaking, we think, yes, this is a congressional authority to deal with the payroll tax, the amount, the level, any delay, and so forth. However, through the executive order, it may be possible to delay payroll taxes again. So this is certainly something that we're going to keep our eye very closely on, because if they were able to delay for a few months, it's not clear that they wouldn't be able to delay for a longer period of time as well.
There's a question, is there a pending massive cut in benefits on Medicare? And I think, the suggestion again from Ken is that Social Security in next year's budget, I think the order of $25 billion. And he wants to know if his assumption is correct. Does AARP plan to object to those reductions and cuts? If you can speak to that.
Sure. Well, obviously, right now we're coming to the end of the congressional session. We're not expecting much action now before the election. Congress is likely to come back after the election, and obviously we don't know what's going to happen to the election or how that's going to impact what we call a lame duck session. But at this point in time, there's really no pending legislation on Social Security and Medicare that will be sort of seriously considered by this Congress. So we're going to have to wait for the new Congress. We're going to have to wait for the new congressional budget to be offered. And of course, as we always are, AARP will continue to fight against any kind of cuts to benefits to Social Security and Medicare.
Can I ask a question? David, what about those glitches I keep hearing about that supposedly are going to affect those 4 million people turning 60 in 2020? Could you talk about that a little, please?
Sure. It's kind of an odd little glitch that we're facing. And unfortunately, it affects people who are born in 1960, basically people who are turning 60 this year. And the reason we have this glitch is that, and we have to go a little bit deeper into the Social Security benefit formula for this, but basically Social Security, as you all know, you pay in to Social Security every year. and they calculate what your average wage is for all those years that you're in Social Security, and that's how they help determine your benefit. But what they do is they also index the wages, because obviously what you made 30 years ago as opposed to what you're earning this year are very different because of changes, for example, in average wages and inflation over time. So they basically index those early year wages so that they can make the benefit calculation. The little glitch we're feeling this year is because of this recession, average wages, which usually go up every year, this year very likely may go down. And because of that, anyone who turns 60 this year may be in a little bit of trouble, because 60 is the base year that Social Security uses in calculating your benefit. So if we happen to have a little downturn, and we don't know the numbers yet, we won't know until probably the beginning of next year, after this next year is done. But if the average wages, for example, this year have gone down 5 to 10%, what that may mean is that your Social Security benefit, which is indexed to your age 60 benefit, may also go down by 5 to 10% over your lifetime. So this is a little glitch that we see for this 1 year. And it's actually one of the things we want to try to go back in and fix before all those folks turn 62 and have a potential for claiming benefits. So again, another little COVID-related problem because of the impact on wages.
Thank you, David.
Good question, Mark. A couple more questions from the chat box. We'll try to get to them, and then Mark and I may have a few more besides these. So here's a question again from Linda, and it's one of the proposals that we have relative to addressing the long-term concerns with the program. So she'd like to know whether we support eliminating the cap so all payroll earnings would be subject to the 6.2%. Of course, that being one of many proposals.
Right. This is one of the popular options. And by popular, I say because we, from time to time, go out and ask people about different options, whether they're in focus groups or by surveys. And, quite frankly, a lot of people don't like a lot of the options that are out there because, for example, very few people are interested in cuts to Social Security benefits. That's an option that generally gets rejected. I will say that the idea of raising the payroll tax cap, as we call it, as I mentioned earlier, it's $137,700 this year. It goes up every year with the changes in wages. But that is something that, not surprisingly, is one of the more popular options out there. And so when you ask, whenever you ask AARP, which options do you like and not like, we've kind of tried to hold back on that a little bit, because we know, first of all, that it's not just up to AARP to make a decision on options. We want to know where our membership stands on these before we sort of say yes or no to options. And we also know that there are going to be many different options in a package when it's put together at the end of the day. They won't just be one option. There have to be kind of a multiple number of changes. But I can say pretty definitively, this is one of the few options that has really a majority of support for it, and it's certainly that one that AARP has been supportive of.
David, this is a real particular question, and I don't know if you can answer it, but we'll ask it anyways. And one of the attendees wishes to know how exactly that the tax paid on Social Security benefits, on his or her Social Security benefits, is directed to Social Security versus the U.S. Treasury.
Well, this isn't too dissimilar from what I said earlier about the trust funds. Any of this money going in, whether it be payroll taxes or taxes on benefits that's dedicated to Social Security, goes into the Social Security Trust Fund. And so any of that money that's not used for benefits in the trust fund is, again, invested in Treasury bonds, but that money can only be used by law for Social Security benefits.
Marcia wants to know whether, we saw much traction after the hard effort we did, certainly here in New Hampshire, asking the would-be candidates in the 2016 presidential primary to take a stand on Social Security. I mean, did we see that there'd been a lot of momentum gained from that work, basically asking candidates to set forth their position for updating that crucial program? Anything from your vantage point on that? I mean, how much progress did we see or lack of it?
I guess the answer to that is probably we didn't make enough progress. We were trying to begin and establish a little bit broader debate on Social Security, what the possibilities are for both improving the solvency of the program, but also improving the adequacy of the program. There are, some proposals, for example, that would help improve some of the benefits in Social Security as well. And so we wanted to have a discussion of all these options on the table. We've asked candidates over the years to give us their positions on them, just as we've asked our members and the rest of the population to give us their views on those as well. Because without having this dialogue and debate over some of the issues and what some of the proposals mean, we can't really get started on a package to help make Social Security strong for the long term. So I think we did get some information back, but quite frankly, we've obviously been diverted with other crises over the last couple of years, and we haven't really had a good opportunity, I think, to have a real debate on Social Security.
A lot of roiled waters. Mark, if I might, can I just ask a few more questions from the chat box? There's
Yes.
still quite a few coming in. Roger wants to know about what options do we advocate for to maintain Social Security solvency, and I would refer him to it's the 12 options, David. There are 12 different proposals, and we did a publication. We're proud of it. Basically, we commissioned a publication about 12 options to update Social Security, and you can see what those 12 options are, and then you can see the pros and cons from either side of the aisle. We asked, you might remember exactly who it was. It was the society, Committee to Protect Social Security and Medicare on one side, and then the Heritage Foundation on the other, David?
Right, kind of a left-leaning and a right-leaning group that were basically representing sort of different sides on all the issues. And we wanted, again, as you mentioned, put those issues and options out there so people could understand them and could discuss them and help us come to a conclusion about which options make the most sense.
And I think that's great. And I think that really ties together beautifully because it is incumbent upon all of you folks to help inform us about where you think we should go as an organization. We do listen to the voices of our members. I mean, you are our membership. Those of you who are members, thank you for being members. But we also want to be able to take that feedback and approach our elected officials. And similarly, so should you. I mean, we should insist that people speak about these issues. I've said it on the radio before in New Hampshire, and I'm privileged to serve in the role that I serve in. But I've said, and I've used this phrase, and I'll use it again here. It is when people are seeking the privilege of high office, they ought to be able to speak to things like Medicare and Social Security in a basket of domestic issues important to the American people. That is not to say we don't have many other issues of great importance, both domestically and internationally, but they have to be able to speak to those issues. And I think when you're more informed about it, you being members or voters, you can ask and frankly demand that those seeking high office be able to speak fluently on these issues. Some comment that they can't live on Social Security disability now. Thank you for that. I'm sorry for that. I'm sure it is difficult. Somebody wants to know, David, why they pay 85% taxes on why their Social Security, 85% of their Social Security incomes are taxed when they already paid taxes on it during their work life.
Well, I mean, I can tell you because of the law, I mean, that was probably now over 25 years ago. Taxation of benefits was first introduced. Actually, it was introduced initially in the 1983 package, and then an additional tier of tax was added on in 1994, I believe. So over 25 years ago, that's been the law. Again, all that money goes into either the Medicare or in some cases the Social Security trust funds get pieces of that money, both. So that has been in the law as part of helping to improve solvency of the programs now for a long period of time.
Mark.
Yes, David, a question that's near and dear to my heart. What about a separate cost of living adjustment for the elderly?
Yeah, it's a good question, and indeed, there have been bills pending in Congress to do just that AARP has endorsed. I mentioned earlier the cost of living adjustment for this year or for next year, 1.3%, and it's based on what's called the CPIW, or the Consumer Price Index for workers, and it's basically a market basket of what workers purchase in the year. Well, of course, that's all well and good, but the market basket for people who are younger is not necessarily the same as the market basket for people who are older. People who are older purchase different items. One in particular that they purchase much more of is healthcare. And of course, any look at the numbers, and anyone knows that healthcare inflation and the prices for healthcare grow much faster than other prices. So the cost of the things that the elderly spend their money on is not captured as well. And therefore, we have advocated for what's called a CPIE, Consumer Price Index for the elderly, that will basically match the elderly market basket and what the elderly actually spend. And we think that'll actually result in a higher COLA.
And David, what exactly would the elderly be?
Well, in this case, it would be the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, actually has a experimental CPIE. It's not a full blown program that they can really use yet, but it gives you a sense of what they can use. And they basically look at all the things that the elderly generally purchase and do samples from around the country. And then they basically can see what are the prices of those different items. And then they create a market basket for the elderly, and they come up with a different kind of inflation rate, cost of living adjustment for the elderly.
Okay, let me rephrase the question, David. How old are you if you're elderly?
Well, in this case, I think they're using folks who are on Social Security.
Thank you.
So we're going to begin to wrap up. We want to honor your time. I know a lot of folks have screen fatigue, but we really, really hope that this is something that was informative to you and based on good information and facts, and giving you a springboard for further inquiry should you wish to do it. Absolutely delighted to partner with Neil Levesque and the Institute and his fine team down there, including Ann and his tech team who made this all come together seamlessly. Thank you all. Thank you to Marc Boyd and to David Certner for taking time, and for all of you and your questions in the chat box. I'll look one more time to see if there are any other questions that have come in, but we tried to get a lot of them up there. We'll try to put in the chat box the information on the 12 proposals if you'd like to see that. And I'm told by our comms director, Pam, that we will be able to send you additional information for those who have registered if you should like it. So with that, I'll turn it over to Marc to wrap us up, take us home. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question for our listeners. We are but 13 days away from voting. It can't come quick enough. Hopefully you have a plan and will vote, because now more than ever, your voice needs to be heard. So please get out there and vote. I would also like to tell everyone that if you want to see this program over, it will be on the AARP New Hampshire website shortly. And with that said, I want to thank all our spectators and people who joined us today for this presentation. And please don't worry, we will be talking a lot more about Social Security in the coming months. Thank you, and stay healthy.